How many of you guys are any movie fans? Any Marvel fans in here? Okay, a few Marvel fans. Star Wars, kind of these are the big ones, right? Okay, there's been a lot of controversy on the Star Wars thing right now. A lot of people questioning where Disney's taking things or whatever. But one of the things that I like about movies, or I find really interesting, is this idea of Easter eggs. Do you know what Easter eggs are? I mean, not the kind that you decorate, right, at Easter. Easter eggs in movies are these things that they put in movies that are inside secrets. They're hidden jokes or things like that are not obvious on the surface, but to somebody who's maybe a big fan or something like that, you might pick up on a little joke that's kind of just thrown in there, okay? And these they call Easter eggs. So, and actually a lot of these movies, they have these Easter eggs, and you can go on YouTube, right? And there's people that's all they do is they search for these Easter eggs. In fact, sometimes I think they find Easter eggs where there really aren't any, but that's okay. And so this whole idea, so I used to watch this TV show called Psych. And the thing that I liked about Psych is that in every episode, there was a pineapple hidden in one of the scenes. Okay? And I would always forget about it. So I missed it almost every time. But there was always just a pineapple hidden somewhere in the background. And so you had to be really, looking for it to be able to see it. I'm sure some people probably go back and rewatch the whole thing just so that they can find the pineapples that are hidden in the scenes. Has anybody done that before? Anybody watch Psych? Okay, all right. So Easter eggs. But Easter eggs, they're not a new idea. Okay? They're not a modern invention. God's actually been using them for a few thousand years now. Okay? And God, I guess you could say that he even actually came up with the idea of Easter eggs. And the reason why I say that is because if you read the Old Testament, you will find several places where God dropped hints, little tidbits of information that were hidden to the people of that day. Amen. But that God was going to reveal later on as this special idea. It was like a little revelation that he gave them that maybe they didn't fully understand at that time. And we could see those throughout the Old Testament. We've kind of been, over the past few weeks, looking for these little hidden gems, so to speak. And so we've done that through the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of the law: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I thought we were going to go really fast through these books, but I'm telling you, there are so many gems, so many Easter eggs hidden in there that we've just been taking our time to find them all, okay? And this one, I think, is one of the coolest ones that we're going to talk about today, and it's in the book of Joshua. And just to kind of set the stage here, so the people of Israel, God delivered them out of the hands of another nation, the nation of Egypt, where they had been slaves for many years. But once they moved out of Egypt, they were wandering in this wilderness area, this desert, for about 40 years. Okay, 40 we know that's a significant number to God. 40 also is the number of days Jesus spent out in the wilderness during the time of his fasting and then temptation. And finally, after these 40 years, they are getting ready to go into the promised land, into the land that God has promised to them, okay? And so they've been anticipating this, looking forward to this land. Now, the wandering that they had gone through for 40 years, it wasn't wasted. It was not wasted. And this is important for us to hear, okay? It was not wasted time. It wasn't insignificant. God used that time to establish his people as a new nation. He used that time to set boundaries on their relationship with him. He used that time to give them this law and to help them to form their way of worshiping him and coming into right relationship with him. And he helped them become a holy nation, holy, like we talked about a little bit ago, being set apart from all other nations. Okay? And this is why I say that this is important for us to get, because there's a message in here for us. Because some of us have been through those times where we felt like we were just wandering aimlessly in the desert. And I want to tell you this morning that God does not waste that time. We might waste that time. We might actually be ready to move, or God might be ready to move us into the promised land faster if we would set our hearts and our focus aright on him. But sometimes we don't do that. And so he gives us this wandering wilderness time. But he wants to use that time to set our focus and our attention on him. You get what I'm saying here? So that's why it's important not to badmouth the times that the Lord puts us through some tough things, and really figure out how is he going to use that to his advantage and my advantage in the future. All right? So that's the message for us. And that's what he did for Israel. It served another purpose, though. A big purpose. And that is to get rid of baggage. See, when you're a slave, as they had been in Egypt for many, many years, you carry baggage with you. And once you're free, okay, listen to this. Once you're free, you have to learn how to live free.
Amen.
Just because you're free does not mean that you're living free. And so you have to learn how to do that. And that's what he was doing. Listen to this, Joshua 5:9. The Lord said to Joshua, so this is kind of after they've moved past this wilderness wandering time. He says to Joshua, today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Okay? Remember, Egypt was their slavery. I've rolled away the reproach. What does that mean? Like, I've never come up to one of you guys and said, hey, let's roll away the reproach. You'd be like, what? What the heck are you talking about? Reproach is shame. Reproach is disgrace. And it's scorn. All of those kind of negative things that we can hold on to. And all of that baggage came with them as they came out of Egypt. They hung onto it and they clung onto it. And it had to be released. And at that moment that God said that to Joshua, it was finally released. It was finally let go. And they had to roll back that reproach. The thoughts and the ideas, the culture that they had been living on, living under bad leadership, all of that had to go and be left behind. Now, however, it's 40 years later. There's a new generation in a sense, right? Because now you've even got some people that have not experienced Egypt. Okay? Now that's a pro and a con. Because they hadn't experienced the deliverance that God had brought for the people. Right? And so they could forget, or, every new generation hasn't experienced what the previous generation has. And every generation we learn from our junk, right? And we hope we can pass it on to the next generation, but sometimes they have to learn too, okay? But this is a new generation with the new thoughts and new experience, which is also a good thing. And God called one man. This man had been a servant to Moses, and he called Joshua to be their leader. Here's what I think is significant about that, is that God chooses leaders, or he often chooses leaders who know how to serve. And I just love that before Joshua was a leader, he was first and foremost a servant. That kind of reminds me of Jesus as well. who submitted himself to become a servant and became, ultimately our leader through that. And so this is Joshua. And Joshua was a man for his time. He was the one, you might remember, that earlier had been sent into the promised land. He was one of the first people that his feet touched that new land. And he was sent to spy it out with some other guys, a group of guys, right? And you remember what happened. He came back, and there's this report. They're all reporting, and they're like, whoa, we can't do this. What in the world? Those people are like giants, and like this is like a bad idea. God told them this is their land, but they're like, what are we getting into here? But not Joshua. Joshua and Caleb. Those two guys, they come back and they're like, what are you talking about? This land is amazing. Like, it's, this is the land that God promised. It's flowing with milk and honey. Like, there's so much good there. And of course, it wasn't well received because the bigger voice was the voice of the people that were like, we can't do this. No way, But Joshua was a man who didn't see things from his own perspective, so to speak. He saw things the way that God saw them. And when he looked at the promised land, he saw God's promised land. And that's what he spoke to. Man, God keeps bringing that up today. That just keeps coming up. That we need to see things from his perspective and not our own. Don't leave here without getting that today in your heart, okay? Bless you. In many ways, Joshua was a forerunner of Jesus. And this is what we've been talking about, right? How we see Jesus pictured in the Old Testament in various ways. And it begins with his name. Let me jump to the New Testament for a minute. If you have your Bibles, turn with me to Hebrews 4:8. Hebrews 4:8. This is pretty interesting. Okay, now, people talk about translations of the Bible, and like I've heard some people say, there's all these different translations, and I don't see that as a negative thing.
No.
I actually find that translations of the Bible line up like 99% of the time. They're all saying the same thing, and there might be that like 1% where they're kind of like trying to figure out kind of different perspectives on some verses or whatever. But this is really interesting, okay? Hebrews 4:8. In one version, in some versions, it says something like this. It talks about the children of Israel being given rest, okay? And it says, if Joshua had given them rest, okay? But in another version, it says this. If Jesus had given them rest. Okay, what's up with this? Like, that's a pretty big difference. Like, it's a name. Somebody's name. Is it Joshua? Does it say Joshua? Or does it say Jesus? Okay? Now, here's the interesting thing. Why the difference? Because Joshua is the Hebrew name Yehoshua.
Yahweh.
Yehoshua. Yehoshua is translated into Greek I might need help with my Greek translation. Okay. Iosaus, I think is how you pronounce it. Iisus. Okay, Iisus. And Iisus is translated into English as Jesus. Jesus.
Same name.
Joshua and Jesus are the same name. Okay, do you think that's an accident?
No.
No way. Joshua was a picture in the Old Testament of Jesus and what Jesus was going to come to do. Now, I'm not saying they were, the same person. I'm not saying that this is Jesus, in a different form. But I believe that he was a forerunner of God pointing the way. He's kind of an Easter egg, okay, of Jesus and what Jesus was coming to do. Okay, so check this out. The name means appropriately The Lord